Imagine standing at the edge of a doorway. Not just any doorway, the doorway that feeds a quarter of the world's energy supply. Every single day, millions of barrels of oil, billions of dollars of liquefied natural gas, and the economic lifelines of entire nations flow through a narrow strip of water barely 33 kilometers wide at its tightest point. Now imagine that doorway is locked, bolted shut, and the two powers holding the keys are pointing weapons at each other across the water. That's the Strait of Hormuz right now. And what's happening there, what's really happening beneath the media noise and political spin, is one of the most consequential standoffs the modern world has ever seen. Not because of the missiles, not because of the fighter jets, but because of what happens when 73 oil tankers can't move, when a regime's entire regional power structure depends on those tankers moving, and when the clock is ticking louder by the hour. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why this isn't just a Middle Eastern conflict. This is a pressure cooker with a broken valve, and it's pointed at all of us. Let's start with something most people haven't thought about. For years, decades actually, Iran's leadership operated on a single strategic assumption. The Strait of Hormuz was their trump card, their ace, their ultimate leverage point in every negotiation, every standoff, every moment of international pressure. The logic was clean and seductive. Control the strait, and you control the world's energy jugular. Control that, and even the United States has to eventually come to the table. It was a beautiful theory, and for a long time, nobody called the bluff. Then the bluff was called, and everything changed. Right now, as you're watching this, 73 Iranian tankers are sitting in the Persian Gulf like ghost ships. They're not moving. They can't move. The combined value of the oil sitting on those vessels has crossed $13 billion. That number isn't abstract. That's hospitals. That's military salaries. That's the financial oxygen that keeps Iran's entire network of regional influence breathing. Hezbollah fighters waiting on payment, Houthi operations in Yemen needing ammunition, Iraqi militias calculating their loyalty based on whether Tehran can still deliver. All of that, all of it, flows through those tankers. And right now, those tankers are parked. The question nobody is asking loudly enough is this: how did a strategy designed to strangle the world end up strangling the country that designed it? To understand that, you have to understand the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. These aren't conventional soldiers following a defense doctrine. They're a hybrid organization, part military, part political machine, part economic empire. The IRGC controls significant portions of Iran's economy, runs proxy networks across at least 5 countries, and has spent decades building what military analysts call an anti-access area denial doctrine specifically for the Gulf. In plain language, that means we may not be able to fight you head on, but we can make the water so dangerous, so unpredictable, that you'll think twice before entering. For a while, that doctrine worked beautifully as a deterrent. Nobody wanted to test it. The threat itself was the weapon. But deterrence only works if the other side blinks. And this time, the other side didn't blink. What unfolded across several weeks has been a tactical education in how a doctrine built on fear can collapse the moment fear stops working. The IRGC ran through its playbook almost in sequence, like chapters of a book you can see the ending of before you finish it. First, keep the strait closed and let oil prices spike. Let economic pressure do the work. The theory was that markets would scream, allies would fracture, and Washington would come calling. Instead, the blockade was tightened. The economic pain bounced back harder toward Tehran than toward anyone in the West. Then came the escalation to intimidation. If economic pressure wouldn't work, perhaps military boldness would. In early May, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles rained down on the UAE's Fujairah port, 15 of them. The calculation was that Gulf nations, terrified of becoming collateral damage, would distance themselves from the American position, pressure the neighbors, isolate Washington, force a negotiated exit. The opposite happened. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait drew closer to the blockade, not further away. Fear, paradoxically, had unified the neighborhood against Tehran rather than fracturing it. And then came the night that changed everything. The night the IRGC decided to go all in. May 7th. Under cover of darkness, the Revolutionary Guards activated what defense planners called the full denial of sea doctrine. This was not a warning shot. This was everything. Kamikaze drones launched in coordinated waves, cruise missiles fired in sequence, armed assault boats surging across the water toward 3 American destroyers. And deep inside the islands of Kish and Kesh and the coast at Bandar Abbas, the underground missile cities, facilities the IRGC had spent decades building and hiding, opened their gates for the first time. Missiles rolled out of tunnels carved into rock. It was the moment Iran had promised for years, the great unleashing. CENTCOM responded within hours. Bandar Abbas, Kesh, Minab, strike after strike, each one precise, each one targeting what had just been revealed. The moment those underground doors opened, they became coordinates. The arsenal that had been invisible for decades, protected by secrecy, by rock, by strategic patience, was visible for exactly as long as it took to destroy it. By morning, what Iran had spent 30 years building underground was ash. The remaining IRGC naval forces retreated. The force that had declared dominion over the strait was now sheltering along its own coastline, hoping not to be seen. But even at this point, the IRGC wasn't finished. And what happened next revealed something important about how the Iranian strategic mind operates under pressure. They had one move left, and it was clever, genuinely clever. The Shadow Fleet. For years, Iran had been quietly assembling a network of tankers operating outside normal tracking systems, using shell companies, flag swaps, and transponder manipulations to move oil beneath the radar of international sanctions. Now they pointed that fleet directly at the American blockade line like a battering ram. The calculus was elegant in its brutality. Send massive tankers straight at the blockade. If the U.S. sinks them, the world watches oil spill across the Gulf, outrage erupts, and American credibility collapses. If the U.S. lets them through, the blockade cracks. Either outcome breaks the stranglehold. It appeared to be a perfect dilemma, the kind with no good answer. Except there was a third answer, and an FA-18 Super Hornet pilot found it. On May 8th, operating off the USS George H.W. Bush, a naval aviator approached 2 Iranian tankers, the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda, and did something that wasn't in Iran's calculation. Instead of targeting the hull, instead of sinking the ship, the pilot targeted the exhaust stack, the engine compartment's ventilation outlet. A 500-pound laser-guided munition, locked from 5,000 feet, fell through the air and collapsed the engine room on impact. The ship didn't sink. It stopped, still floating. Crew unharmed, oil sealed inside. Cameras rolling. This was the 3rd time American forces had applied this doctrine in the same campaign. A destroyer's deck gun had already disabled one engine room. A Vulcan cannon had blown apart a rudder on another vessel. The pattern was unmistakable and deliberate. Stop, don't sink. Disable, don't destroy. Take away the narrative, not just the ship. Because here's what Iran's entire Shadow Fleet strategy depended on: the sinking, the dramatic, visible, oil-gushing catastrophe that would turn global public opinion. When the tanker merely stopped, crew safe, hull intact, cargo contained, there was nothing. No footage of flames consuming the water, no environmental disaster to broadcast, no martyr ship to rally around. Just a very expensive vessel sitting dead in the water, surrounded by the evidence of Iran's strategic impotence. Every disabled tanker became not a rallying symbol, but a humiliation broadcast to the world in real time. And the pressure isn't just external. That's what makes this moment truly dangerous. Inside Iran, 2 completely different visions of the country's future are colliding in Tehran's corridors of power. On one side, the IRGC and its hardline allies, who see backing down as civilizational surrender, who believe that the moment Iran negotiates under pressure, the regime itself begins to crumble. On the other side, the faction around President Pezeshkian that is watching ordinary Iranians suffer and calculating that survival requires a diplomatic exit before the streets explode. And the streets are already starting to simmer. Food prices are climbing. Medicines that hospitals depend on are growing harder to source. Power outages are spreading through cities that haven't experienced consistent blackouts like this since the early years of the Islamic Republic. People are going to bed hungry, while state television runs footage of military victories. That gap between the narrative and the lived reality is historically the most dangerous gap in any political system. The protests that shook Iran in January of 2026 didn't disappear. They went underground. And underground movements have a way of surfacing when economic pain becomes impossible to ignore. The IRGC knows this, and knowing it may be what's driving them toward increasingly desperate moves, because doing something, anything, feels better than sitting still while the walls close in. Within the organization itself, fractures are forming. When commanders brief each other on what actually happened, not what the state media reported, but the actual results of the May 7th assault, the loss of the underground arsenal, the retreat of the naval forces, questions follow. Who authorized this? Why did intelligence fail to anticipate the American response? Why did we expose 30 years of deterrence infrastructure in a single night and lose it all before sunrise? These are not comfortable questions in a chain of command that runs on projecting certainty. The regional ripple effects are expanding in ways that will outlast this specific confrontation, regardless of how it resolves. Hezbollah, which has operated for years on Iranian financial support, is beginning to feel the cash flow tighten. When an organization that pays salaries starts missing payment cycles, loyalty becomes a market commodity. The Houthi operations in Yemen, already stretched, face the same arithmetic. Iraqi militias that have orbited Tehran's gravitational pull for years are quietly recalculating. The proxy network that took Iran decades and hundreds of billions of dollars to construct is discovering that it runs on a foundation of continuous financial transfer. And the transfer mechanism is stuck inside 73 tankers that can't move. Meanwhile, the economic numbers are staggering in their specificity. In the first 18 days of the blockade alone, April 13th through May 1st, American defense estimates placed Iran's oil revenue losses at nearly $5 billion. The daily toll, according to figures publicly stated by the Trump administration, runs around $500 million. That's not just budget pressure. That's a structural crisis for a government that already operates under severe sanctions and depends on oil for more than 40% of its exports. And there's something happening off the coast of Karg Island that satellite imagery is beginning to expose, something that may represent the most alarming dimension of this entire crisis. Karg Island processes approximately 90% of Iran's oil exports. With the blockade sealing that terminal, Iran faces a problem that has no good solution. It keeps extracting oil from its wells because shutting wells down carries its own catastrophic costs. Some older field structures, once sealed, require years to restart, and some may never fully recover. But with nowhere to send the oil, storage on land is full. Tankers in port are being used as floating warehouses, and they're filling too. And then the satellite images showed something spreading across the water. A slick, 71 kilometers of it, growing from one day to the next off the Karg Island coastline. Environmental researchers have described it as visually consistent with crude oil contamination. Energy analysts describe what may be happening in terms of disposal. When storage is full and export is impossible, the pressure finds release somewhere. If that's what this is, Iran may be creating the very environmental catastrophe it accused America of risking, not through military action, but through the slow, desperate overflow of a trapped economy. The global dimension of this crisis is what makes it genuinely unprecedented. Before this conflict began, 1 in every 4 barrels of seaborne oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas moved through that same corridor. China, which has built its industrial output on affordable energy imports, has Iran as one of its primary oil suppliers. India's refineries are recalibrating under price pressure. Japan, which routes 70% of its Middle Eastern energy through Hormuz, is watching its supply chain assumptions collapse in slow motion. South Korea is in the same position. Oil crossed the $100 per barrel mark. In the early days of the full closure, tanker traffic through the strait dropped by 70%. More than 150 ships anchored outside the entrance, waiting, watching, unwilling to risk the war premium that insurance markets are now attaching to anything that moves in Gulf waters. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline has been pointed to as an alternative route, but its capacity tops out at 5 million barrels per day. The strait carries 3 times that volume. There is no alternative that replaces Hormuz. There is only degrees of shortage. China's position may be the most consequential variable still in play. Beijing has been buying Iranian oil throughout the blockade, navigating sanctions through the same shadow networks Iran has long relied on. But on May 8th, a tanker crewed by Chinese nationals was struck near the strait. No casualties, but the message was clear. Chinese commercial interests are now inside the blast radius. Beijing's foreign ministry expressed concern. The question that matters is whether concern becomes action, whether China decides that its economic stakes require a more direct role in mediating an exit, or whether it continues to absorb the losses while protecting Iran diplomatically at the United Nations. Russia's position is perhaps the most cynically revealing. Moscow provides Iran with rhetorical cover, vetoes resolutions, amplifies anti-American narratives. Meanwhile, with oil above $100 a barrel, Russian export revenues are climbing. Iran's suffering is, in the coldest arithmetic, Moscow's profit. Whether Iran's leadership has fully processed what that means about the nature of their alliance is unclear, but it is visible to anyone watching the numbers. So where does this end? A CIA assessment delivered to policymakers frames the timeline starkly. Iran can sustain the current situation for 3 to 4 months before the economic damage becomes physically catastrophic. 3 to 4 months. That sounds like time, but it's not. Every day of that window costs Iran $500 million. Every day tightens the screws on a population that is already near its limit. Every day gives the fractures inside the IRGC more time to widen. Every day, the proxy network that took generations to build loses a little more of the financial oxygen it needs to breathe. The American position, articulated plainly by CENTCOM Commander Admiral Cooper, is that the blockade will be fully enforced. More than 50 ships have already been turned back. The doctrine is consistent, the tactics are working, and a 14-point proposal is officially on the table, covering mutual de-escalation within 30 days and a pathway to permanent ceasefire negotiations, with Iran's nuclear facilities as the central demand on the American side. Iran's response to that proposal is, as of now, the most important unanswered question in global geopolitics. The ceasefire that was declared on April 8th is technically still in effect. It is also being tested every single day by missile launches, tanker seizures, and skirmishes that both sides describe differently to their own audiences. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking from Italy, said Washington is waiting for Tehran's answer and hoping it opens a door to serious talks. Whether that door opens or stays shut may determine not just Iran's next 3 months, but the next decade of global energy architecture. Here's what it comes down to. For 40 years, Iran told itself and the world, Hormuz is our power. Hormuz is our shield. Hormuz is the reason the world cannot ignore us. And that was true in the way that a weapon is true, as long as you don't have to use it. The moment it was used, the weapon became a trap. The strait that was supposed to protect Iran is now sealing its oil inside. The tankers that were supposed to be leverage are sitting still in the Gulf, rusting away $13 billion of revenue. The underground arsenal that was supposed to be the ultimate deterrent was exposed in a single night and destroyed before morning. 73 tankers can't move. A massive oil slick is spreading off Karg Island. Fighter jets are disabling ships with surgical precision rather than sinking them, taking away the narrative Iran needs to survive this internationally. And inside Tehran, two factions are locked in a conflict about what comes next, while the streets grow quieter and angrier simultaneously. The parking lot that Iran's triumphant strait has become is not just an economic crisis, it's a mirror. And what Iran sees in that mirror, what its leadership, its military commanders, its people, and its neighbors are all seeing, is the gap between what was promised and what is real. 3 to 4 months, the analysts say, but the clock doesn't wait for anyone to be ready. And every minute that passes in that strait costs someone, somewhere, something they may never get back. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Iran will move toward negotiations before the economic damage becomes irreversible? Or does the IRGC's institutional pride make compromise impossible? I want to hear where you think this goes. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this story is moving fast, and we're going to be right here covering every development as it unfolds.